They saw it coming. Every sign was there. The droughts, the failed harvests, the collapsing trade routes, the wars that never stopped. Their astronomers could predict a solar eclipse to the exact day. Their scribes recorded every disaster in stone. And yet, one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history watched itself collapse in slow motion and did absolutely nothing to stop it. Between 800 and 950 AD, over 90% of the great Maya cities in the southern lowlands were abandoned. Not conquered, not burned to the ground by a foreign army, just left. And what makes this one of the most haunting mysteries in all of ancient history isn't the collapse itself. It's the fact that the evidence strongly suggests they knew exactly what was happening and kept building monuments anyway. So let's start with what most people actually believe about the Maya collapse, because the popular version of this story is almost completely wrong. The version that gets taught, the simple one, the clean one, is that the Maya civilization mysteriously vanished. You've probably heard some variation of it. One of the greatest ancient civilizations simply disappeared overnight. Nobody knows why the Maya abandoned their cities. It remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. And on the surface, that framing sounds dramatic and compelling. But here's what most people completely miss. The Maya didn't vanish, and this wasn't a mystery to them while it was happening. The Maya as a people never disappeared. Millions of Maya descendants are alive today, and that's a fact that often gets buried under the mysterious collapse narrative. What collapsed was the political and urban structure of the classic Maya period, specifically in the southern lowlands of what is now Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico. And the evidence we have doesn't suggest a sudden, inexplicable catastrophe. It suggests something far more unsettling. It suggests a system that could see the cliff it was driving toward and couldn't or wouldn't turn the wheel. Now, to understand why that matters, you need to understand what the classic Maya were actually capable of. Because these were not a primitive people struggling to survive in a jungle. The classic Maya built cities that at their peak housed hundreds of thousands of people. They developed a fully written language, one of only a handful of independently invented writing systems in all of human history. Their calendar system was so precise that it tracked astronomical cycles across thousands of years. Their astronomers tracked Venus with an accuracy that still impresses researchers today. They understood mathematics well enough to use the concept of zero, a development most of the ancient world hadn't reached. Seriously speaking, these were sophisticated thinkers operating at a level that puts a lot of the "they just couldn't handle it" explanations completely to rest. So, what actually happened? It comes down to a collision between environmental collapse and political dysfunction, and the evidence for both is extraordinarily specific. Research published by Harvard in 2020 used lake sediment cores from the Yucatan Peninsula to reconstruct a detailed climate record going back over 1,000 years. What they found was striking. 9 of the 10 driest years in that entire millennium occurred between 800 and 1000 AD, right during the height of the collapse. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. Prolonged, severe drought hit the Maya heartland at exactly the moment when the civilization was already under maximum stress from warfare and political fragmentation. The agriculture that fed these massive urban populations was collapsing. The reservoirs that stored water through dry seasons were running low. Crop yields were falling. And because classic Maya cities depended on surplus agriculture to sustain their elite classes, their monument-building programs, and their military campaigns, every one of those systems started to fracture at once. But here's where the story gets genuinely disturbing, and this is the part that history tends to gloss over. The rulers knew. We know they knew because they wrote it down. Maya stelae, the carved stone monuments erected by rulers to record their achievements, document droughts, famines, and military defeats during this exact period. Inscriptions from cities like Copan and Quirigua record what researchers now understand as references to resource scarcity and political instability. The scribes weren't hiding the bad news. It's there in stone, literally carved into the monuments these kings commissioned to glorify themselves. And that's the irony that cuts deepest. Because what did Maya rulers do when the drought hit, when the harvests failed, when the population was starving? They built more monuments. They launched more wars against neighboring city-states, wars that consumed resources and labor that could have gone toward food production or infrastructure repair. They continued extracting tribute from populations that were already running out of surplus to give. This is crazy. The same political system that created the astronomical observatories, the writing system, the long-distance trade networks, that same system was structurally incapable of redistributing resources in a crisis. Think about what that means for a moment. You have astronomers sophisticated enough to calculate eclipse cycles centuries into the future. You have mathematicians working with concepts that the Roman Empire at its peak never developed. And you have rulers who could look at their own written records, look at the empty reservoirs, look at the failing crops, and respond by commissioning a new pyramid. Why? Some researchers suggest the answer lies in how classic Maya political power actually worked. Unlike some ancient empires, classic Maya cities were not organized into a single unified state. They operated as a collection of competing city-states, each with its own king, each obsessed with prestige, each locked in a cycle of warfare and monument building that was fundamentally about displaying dominance over rivals. In that system, a king who stopped building monuments and started rationing grain wasn't adapting, he was losing. He was signaling weakness to every rival city within striking distance. The political logic that built the civilization was the same logic that made it impossible to save. And the archaeology reflects this in a way that's almost painful to look at. At Copan, one of the most thoroughly excavated classic Maya sites we have, researchers found evidence of intensifying construction projects right up to the city's abandonment. The last monuments at Copan were commissioned by a ruler who, based on the archaeological record, was presiding over a city already in serious decline. Population was falling, agricultural productivity was dropping, and yet more stone, more monuments, more declarations of divine power carved into surfaces that would sit abandoned within a generation. Not only that, the warfare between cities intensified during this period, not decreased. When resources get scarce, the logical human response might seem like cooperation. History, unfortunately, suggests the opposite. Maya cities that were already stressed by drought started raiding each other more aggressively for tribute, for captives, for the political wins that a king needed to justify his continued rule. This accelerated the collapse rather than slowing it. Each city-state trying to survive by exploiting its neighbors was collectively destroying the regional stability that all of them depended on. Now, and this is a perspective that's been gaining significant attention in recent scholarship, some researchers argue that framing this purely as "they did nothing" may be too simple. There's growing archaeological evidence that ordinary Maya communities in some regions actually adapted more effectively than the elite centers. Smaller settlements in areas with more reliable water access persisted longer. Some communities did shift agricultural practices. The collapse was not uniform. It was devastating in the major southern lowland cities, while other areas showed more resilience. A piece published in The Guardian in early 2026 highlighted just how much our understanding of the Maya has been reshaped by new research in recent years. The picture that's emerging is more complex than the old mysterious collapse narrative, but in some ways more troubling. Because what the evidence increasingly points to is a crisis of governance, not a crisis of knowledge. The Maya population didn't lack the intelligence to respond. The Maya elite had the information they needed. What the system lacked was a political structure capable of prioritizing collective survival over individual elite status. And that is a pattern that any student of history will recognize, because the Maya were not the last civilization to face it. The population that had sustained these cities for centuries made a rational choice. When the cities stopped providing security, stopped providing food, stopped providing anything that justified staying, people left. They dispersed into smaller communities. They moved toward areas with more reliable water. They survived, but the urban civilization they'd built over centuries could not survive with them. The cities that had been the pinnacle of Maya cultural achievement became, within a generation or two, empty ruins swallowed by jungle. And the rulers who had commissioned those final monuments, the ones who chose status over survival to the very end, left no successors to read what they'd written. So how do you apply any of this to your own understanding of history? Because this isn't just a story about the ancient Maya. This is a story about what happens when systems optimize for the wrong outcomes under pressure. The classic Maya collapse tells us that intelligence and sophistication do not automatically produce good crisis response. A civilization can develop extraordinary tools for understanding the world, and still be trapped by political incentives that prevent it from acting on what it knows. The drought didn't defeat the Maya. The monument-building impulse that couldn't stop even when the granaries were empty, that's what sealed it. And here's the question that I think this leaves us with, the one I keep coming back to every time I dig into this story. If you could write on stone, if you could record every disaster in permanent form, if you could literally carve the warning into monuments that would survive 1,000 years, would that be enough? The Maya did all of that, and the record they left behind isn't a mystery. It's a confession. They saw it coming. The next episode in this series looks at another civilization that hit a point of no return, and the single decision that pushed it there. If you want to know which empire that is, hit subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops. And if this investigation left you with more questions than answers, that's exactly where we want you. That's where the real thinking starts. OBSCURA Files. The truth was always buried.